Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Well, Michael, it is December 5th, 2025. We have not been together for a couple of weeks.
It was Thanksgiving.
For our podcast, From Our Generation. And you wanted to, we've been talking the last couple of weeks. It was Thanksgiving.
Yes.
We've been talking the last couple of weeks about topics that are kind of thematic in nature, which is what we like to do here.
Yes.
And so what do you want to kind of focus on today from a thematic standpoint, which we will then try to take these larger themes and show some applications of current examples?
The short answer is that the theme is individualism, and the question is, has individualism gone too far? Okay, so let me step back from that and say how this came about. I had lunch with a guy who recommended a book to me, and I said, I've got that on my shelf 2 years ago. I bought it, and I never read it, and I'm going to go back and get it. And I did that over the holidays. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. It's a little bit hard reading. I wouldn't especially recommend it for everybody, but I had to really pay attention and reread some things. It's very meaty.
Okay.
And it comes from a Christian perspective, which not what I was looking for. I am Christian, and so I respect it, but I was looking for really other kind of insights that he had. And basically it's are the cultural problems we have today the result of excessive individualism?
Now define, for purposes of this discussion, define what you call individualism and then excessive individualism. How do you define that?
In the end, it's about identity and how we think of ourselves. You know,
Okay.
we've, in this podcast, talked about an inflection point in history where the U.S. inverted governance, where for all of human history, there was a sovereign that was a king or some religious figure or a tribal leader. There was a group head, and every individual was subject to that group.
Okay.
And when the United States was founded, governance was turned upside down, and it was explicitly said in our governing documents that the government works for the people.
Right.
Okay, so the people now elect the government. The government is a subordinate to the people.
Mm-hmm.
That's theoretically the case.
Mm-hmm.
We don't often see that in our current discourse because a lot of people want the government to organize and tell people what to do. So that's a source of a lot of our political conflict. But it goes much further than that in terms of identity and how people think about themselves, not as a part of a greater whole most of the time, but as sovereigns themselves.
Okay. Now let me. I want to try to understand what you're saying here, because I think I have a little bit of a different opinion on what the word individualism means, because the Declaration of Independence is a very individualized document. It says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and those unalienable rights flow from the individual directly to God, according to the Declaration of Independence, not through a group that they're a part of, but we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are endowed by our Creator.
Yes.
And so when you
very
say
individualistic conception.
But if I'm a member of a group that decides it's aggrieved, am I an individual or am I a member of that group?
Well, the problem here is that you're both of those things.
Okay.
And so how do you come to terms with what constitutes your identity? And part of what this author is dealing with is the excesses that come from an obsession with individual identity, and how much autonomy, how much sovereignty do you have to decide you are a girl or a boy, a fish or a bird or a human? You know, we get way beyond the normal bounds of physical limits. You know, as he says somewhere here, there's no metaphysics anymore because there's not a clear, coherent body of work that supersedes the material world.
Okay.
Right? And we get a lot of confusion about that. Are we defined by our chromosomes? Right? That's the material world. Or are we defined by our psychology and how we think about ourselves?
Okay.
And so, for example, one of the really interesting structures he points out is that, you know, you begin in human history with allegiance to myths and fate. That was a particularly Greek way of looking at the world. There was fate that determined you were out of control most of the time.
Okay.
So you worshiped the gods and hoped they would favor you and things like that. That moved into more of a religious point of view, where you have Judeo-Christian culture, and still there's a great allegiance, abeyance to the transcendent power. We're not in control. There's a transcendent power over us.
Okay.
But as you come forward in history, it becomes, more individual. Let me say it becomes more internal. The way we think about ourselves and who we are, conscience. I'm particularly, by the way, big on conscience. I go to a church that respects my conscience because I don't like to be told what to think.
Okay.
So I'm very individualistic in my attitudes and my preferences. So I'm with this, but the question is, has it gone too far where we don't respect physical limits and
well, but let me see if I can try to understand. I want to dig deeper into what you're talking about here, because to me, somebody who is a strong individualist believes that they have a lot of individual rights, but they also think everybody else has very strong individual rights.
Yes.
Radical individualism, the way I think you're describing it, is you have people who believe that they have very powerful individual rights that other people must respect.
Yes, that's a useful
observation. That they must respect.
Yeah.
And so therefore they are not applying their theory of individualism that they apply to themselves. They're not applying it to other people.
I think that's fair.
And so if that is your definition of radical individualism, that I get to decide who I am, and then everybody else must respect my decision, and must yield to everything that I want them to do, and think
as a
about
consequence
me.
of what you think.
Yes. Yeah. Then that can tear a society apart, because then it's almost, quite interestingly, it's almost like Leviathan of a state of nature.
Yes, and it's worth saying also it's also quite irrational, because
of course it is.
Once you get to a point where things are so emotional, your preferences, your emotional preferences become what's right. Right.
Well, yes,
right and wrong become a matter of intuitions and aesthetics. What you think is beautiful. There's very little logic to say we're bound together by this common understanding of what truth is, of what right is.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that I don't have a problem with somebody who is a radical individualist in the think that they believe they have a lot of individual rights vis-a-vis the government, or even vis-a-vis society, so long as they respect other people's rights to disagree with them.
Completely agree.
But not necessarily use their disagreement to harm them, but to just say, if you want to, let me use an example of an adult who decides they want to transition from one sex to the other using chemicals and surgery. If they want to do that and pay for it, or have other people who voluntarily want to pay for it, I have no problem with that.
I'm with you 100% on that.
I don't think it's a wise decision, but it's their choice.
I would add that I think that ought to apply to adults.
That's what I said. I said adults only.
Okay, all right.
Not children.
Yeah.
But if they believe that they should have the right to do it as adults, but have the society as a whole pay for it, that becomes a problem. Because then
it intrudes on someone else's individualism, on their individual rights. They got to pay for it.
Yeah, if that's the case, then everybody who wants everybody else to pay for whatever it is they want has the same right to demand that of their government.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now, as you pointed out in previous podcasts, a positive right that is financial in nature has a negative right on other people. In other words, it diminishes other people's rights, because it makes somebody else pay for something that they don't want to pay for.
Yeah, so for anyone who didn't hear that discussion, a negative right means leave me alone. I'm free to do what I want. It's up to me. I'm sovereign. This is back to our individualism.
Mm-hmm.
But a positive right is an entitlement. It means I'm entitled to housing, to food, to dignity, to health care, to all the things that tend to pervade our culture now. And so these costs get aggregated and collectivized, and we can't pay for it all.
Right, and also from a practical standpoint, in order for a society to manage itself, to govern itself, where some people can claim that they are owed housing, health care, all these different things, you have to have an administrative state that is incredibly expensive.
Yes.
To extract the money from some, to give it to others, which also, and we're seeing this in the case right now in Minnesota, we're seeing that fraud is oftentimes can run amok, where you have a third party intermediary determining who gets the money, and so it's there's some practical as well as just theoretical. There's some very practical concerns about this idea of, I think what you're describing as radical individualism is I think you're defining it is that individuals get to lay claims on other people.
Well,
to provide for them what they claim they want and need.
That's what has transpired. Whether you call that individualism or not, this is what we're here to work out.
Yeah. Okay.
There's something here that I think is really important about what's going on culturally. I think problems don't get nearly as big if they're individualized. If it's something's between you and me, it's not a cultural problem for the whole country.
Right.
Right. So that's what I mean by individualism, is that things are there's more federalism in the government, where individual local governments have more power than a central one. So I resist
that would be federalism.
That's the true notion
sense.
of the old and so we call the federal government the central government.
Yeah.
That's the opposite.
Yeah.
And so let me just say I'm suspicious of universalism, where everything applies. A principle applies to everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody is subject to some rule or something. I'm skeptical of that because we're way different, and so I like disaggregated government that sees fit to do things the way they want to do it in their community.
Okay, and
so I think we've gotten past that with too much collectivization. I wouldn't call it individualism. I would call it. This is where I'm struggling to connect these two things. We have more and more collectivism, even communism, in some of the elections that we've seen. The people are proposing communist parties. But we also have a culture that's more and more disconnected to traditional ideas and limits of sovereignty.
I'm going to go back to when we drafted in this country when they drafted the Constitution. First of all, they'd had the Articles of Confederation,
right,
where the individual states, 13 states or 13 colonies. I don't remember, frankly, whether they were called states or colonies before the Constitution. Were they called states? The 13 states?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the 13 states, they had the power to print money. They had the power to set tariffs. They had the power to do whatever they wanted. They were almost like 13 sovereign little countries.
Yes.
Okay. And we had a Congress with representatives who had no power to do anything to keep the states from doing whatever it is they wanted to do.
Yes.
And we found out within a very short period of time, 5 or 6 years, that wouldn't work, that the states would compete with each other in ways that were destructive ultimately to the states and to the whole, but there wasn't any way to get them to quit doing it because they had already started.
They were sovereign.
They had already started and they were sovereign. People came together, representatives came together, and they drafted the Constitution. And when they drafted the Constitution, they said, okay, we recognize that human beings inherently, there are always some people in a society who will lust for power. And when they get that power, they will abuse that power. Mm-hmm. Because history shows that was the case throughout history. A few people who ultimately turned out to be bad got power and abused their power and kept society from advancing and did some terrible things to maintain their power. So the people who were drafting the Constitution wanted to do everything they could to try to avoid that. So what they did was they set up the national government, and they gave the national government certain rights. Article 1, Section 8 lists the powers that Congress has. Yeah. Congress can do the following.
Right.
It was assumed that since there was a list of things that they could do, that anything that wasn't in that list they couldn't do.
Well, it wasn't assumed; it was explicitly stated.
Okay, fair enough. And we also then confirmed that in the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution that said any powers not given to Congress, specifically by the Constitution, are left to the states.
Yeah, that's where it was specifically stated.
Okay, so that was in the amendment, not in the Constitution itself.
Yes. Yeah.
But at any rate, and so we went along for 150 years with a very small, not particularly powerful national government in Washington, D.C.,
right.
And we had states that had a lot of powers, but no state could coin money,
right,
and no state could set up tariffs against other states.
Right. So the sovereignty moved to a more centralized direction.
In those two things, yes. And it wasn't until the 1930s that under FDR that the national government became more powerful, and the Congress was allowed by the Constitution and by the courts to then spend money on more things than it had been prior to. So isn't that a natural tendency that we were trying to put up barriers to stop? Isn't it a natural thing and I don't mean a good thing. I don't mean it's good. I just mean natural.
It's natural for organizations to grow of all kinds.
Okay.
They don't go out of business. Easter Seals was created for a particular purpose. I think it was to conquer, what was the disease? Polio?
Polio.
And that's mostly been eradicated,
yes.
Highly marginalized. But they found another purpose. Organizations don't go out of business. So by the same kind of law, any government, any organization, including government, tends to grow. And so we've seen that a lot in recent decades, increasing power and centralization of authority in the United States within our federal government. Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about here is living a bit of a paradox, right? We have more collectivization and concentration
of
power and of economic activity. There's share of GDP that's controlled out of Washington is higher than ever. But we have a culture that looks more and more individualistic. That's what these authors are saying, and it's ironic for sure because they these arrows point in different directions. Are we becoming more aggregated or less aggregated?
Well, but the individualism, as I understand it, the way you're describing is I get to be the way I want to at somebody else's expense.
Yes.
So that's a big difference.
Yes.
Between I get to be the way I want to, leave me alone.
Yes.
And I'll fend for myself. That's not what you're saying. You're describing somebody who wants to be the way they want
at someone else's expense.
At somebody else's expense.
Yeah.
And the reason that I think the reason that trend is getting bigger and bigger is two things. One is Washington has way more power than it's ever had, and because it can deficit spend, there's no financial constraint on doing stupid things. There's no financial constraint because if some group wants to do something stupid, as long as they don't have to tax other people, which would cause those other people to go, wait a minute,
I'm not paying for that.
I'm not paying for that, and politically, but if you can borrow the money, then you can get what you want at the cost, at the long-term cost of the financial well-being of society.
Yeah, whoever has to pay back that money is the one that loses. They're the one that lose the musical chair.
It's like musical chairs, exactly.
So I think this is a really useful distinction that we've arrived at, that when you're expecting these things at other people's expense is the source of the problem. It has to do with the way we think about rights, back to positive and negative rights. In the Founders' Constitution, we've talked about the Founders' Constitution and the Living Constitution, where these two ways of thinking tend to separate. Mm-hmm. In the Founders' Constitution, an individual is responsible. They live or die. They fail or succeed, and people are allowed to fail in that kind of meritocratic system, right? They're free to do either of those things. When we build up these protections against people failing, and if somebody's failing, they need to be bailed out at another person's expense, it tends to create.
Well, you also had
this
before
new idea of rights as entitlements.
Yeah, but you also had. The United States has always been a very generous country in terms of charity, and so even though in the past, before the 1930s, before the national government became so big and powerful, if people did fail, churches and local governments and
Exactly.
There would be people who would help.
Look
Now,
at the names of hospitals in any major city. They're generally religious. Baptist hospital, there's a lot of Catholic hospitals, Catholic schools. This was a community effort to provide for the needy.
Right.
But it was a choice. It was something that they made their mission as something they ought to do as human beings.
Right.
If they were not forced to pay that money, that's what comes with government, is you're forced to do that whether you think it's the right thing to do or not.
And it also was relatively inexpensive to provide that help because it was the money was raised and spent directly.
Yes.
It wasn't raised through taxes or through debt and then apportioned indirectly with giant bureaucracies and
You have local oversight.
yes.
When this is being done, like what was going on in Minnesota, billions of dollars of fraud, right under their noses, but they're not paying attention.
I'm going to push back a little bit on the last word when you said they weren't paying attention.
Okay.
I think they knew it was going on,
Okay.
but they didn't have to pay for it. The federal government was paying for it. And think about this for a second. If billions of dollars of fraud is going on in your state and that money is being funded by the federal government, where are much of those billions of dollars being spent?
In your state.
In your state.
Yeah.
So your state actually benefits. Your state actually benefits economically by the amount of fraud that is created created in your state if the fraud is paid for by people who are not in your state. And so, and I think this is what is called gaming the system.
Right.
Some states have really learned how to get. California is a state that imposed a tax on healthcare providers. They were very happy the healthcare providers were very happy to pay the tax
because they got more reimbursement.
Because then the reimbursements went up.
At Washington's expense.
And California, the tax covered 20% of the total cost of the increase in reimbursement because Washington gave the other 80%.
Yeah.
And so consequently, it was actually financially. And by the way, this goes back to the Articles of Confederation, when you had states that were doing things that were irresponsible but beneficial to the individual states that were doing the irresponsible thing.
Right.
And it took 5 years to figure out that was unsustainable. We are now seeing that on an accelerating rate going on in our country, which is manifesting itself with these huge federal deficits that seem to be completely unstoppable. And I think it all gets back to a lot of what you're talking about, where all these people believe they have a right to housing. You certainly hear the politicians claiming that everybody has, including illegal immigrants, have a right to housing, have a right to education, have a right to health care, have a right to food. It means they have a right to live at somebody else's expense or by borrowing, and they don't have to do anything. In fact, there are now people who are complaining that the new Medicaid requirements require them to work something like 20 hours a month. They're saying that's unfair, and it's harmful, and because they've gotten so used. And I don't know exactly how you get out of it. And I'm interested if you have a
so part of this is governance and the politics of how we govern ourselves and that kind of thing. Where we started was culture. What's going on with our culture and the way we think of ourselves, the way we understand ourselves, the way we promote our well-being. And then there's a second book that I happened to read after having read Carl Truman's book. This was something I've had also laying around.
Okay.
David Brooks, I think is a commentator. He previously was quite conservative. He now has become much more liberal in his outlook.
His father was a very conservative columnist, I believe, for the big Detroit paper, and was
right?
nationally syndicated.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yes.
He wrote a book long ago called about the Bobos. I think it was the new bourgeoisie. I think it was about the wealthy people in New York or something.
Okay.
I didn't read it, but he has this book called The Second Mountain. This was published in I think 2019 or 20.
Okay.
Both of these books are 5 or 6 years old. 2019, David Brooks, The Second Mountain, The Quest for a Moral Life. Okay, so when I first read that, I thought this is about after you've had your career, after you've made your way in the world and, had your family, kind of got those kind of things set. How do you realize yourself? How do you have a moral life, do the right thing? And I saw it as sort of a second wave sort of understanding of life. But I've reframed that now, having read Carl Trueman's book and looked back at David Brooks. What he is saying is that we are plagued by hyper-individualism.
Okay.
And he actually says this on page 20 of the book, that we have a disaster from hyper-individualism because people are chasing success, fulfillment, freedom, self-actualization, independence. Okay? He puts those things together.
Okay.
Now, nothing wrong with that, right? That's part of what we're doing. What he's saying is that it has diminished our interdependence and our relationships with one another. Okay,
that's very confusing to me.
Okay, well,
because I'm trying to understand, what does he mean by interdependence? Is he advocating on behalf of the individuals who believe that other people must adhere to their view of themselves?
Here's from the flyer
Okay.
on the cover, the paper cover of this book. In The Second Mountain, David Brooks explores the 4 commitments that define a life of meaning and purpose: to a spouse and family, to a vocation, to a philosophy or a faith, and to a community. Our personal fulfillment depends on how well we choose and execute these commitments. So he's talking here about less inner looking, less self absorption and more relational things with things that transcend the individual, that being community, family, philosophy or faith.
Okay.
And what was the 4th one?
But the last one was community.
Vocation, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Vocation was his.
Yeah.
He listed community as the 4th of the. Okay.
That's right.
So my question is, because the first 3 make sense to me:
Okay.
family, vocation, faith. That would be very American, from the standpoint of from the founding.
Tocqueville talked about this, about how marvelous he thought it was, the way people organized themselves in mutual societies of support and things in the 1820s.
Right, and so society. So let's just we're going to use Tennessee for example.
Good state to pick.
We're here and we understand it because we live here.
Yes, that's the reason to pick.
Okay, yeah. But Tennessee is a state where I'm wondering whether or not David Brooks would think that we are a good society, whether we've climbed that mountain.
Okay.
Because in Tennessee, we do encourage people to pursue their vocation. We do encourage family. We do encourage religion and faith. And we do encourage community in the way that we think of it here, which is a much lighter touch of government.
Yes.
And a greater dependence on charities and institutions like the Nashville Union Mission or churches or United Way or things like this.
Basically, voluntary efforts as opposed to coerced efforts.
So, what is David Brooks's definition of community? Do you?
Well, I wish he was here, and I can't ask him, and I can't digest this whole book by putting my hand on top of it.
Oh,
so
I've only read this one.
I've read all of Truman's book. I've read part of David Brooks's book. And
this is a Karnak book for you. You hold it to your head, and it pours in.
I think I'm a little further than that, but I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay.
And part of this is what divides us, I think, culturally and politically, is the way we understand something as simple as what is community
and
how much is coercion is involved in a community.
But I'm going to say that the root cause, I'm going to give you an idea I want you to bounce off you.
Okay.
I believe the root cause of all of this, what I believe we both think of as when individuals think they have a right to all kinds of material things, regardless of how much they produce. When they believe that,
yes.
And that then becomes part of our culture, our culture believes that everybody who does have a right to all of those things, that of course is unsustainable, because if you have, just to make it real simple, if you have 10 people on an island and they all think they have a right to food, shelter, water, and clothing, but none of them think they need to do anything to create those things, they'll all starve.
Yeah, I would call that the brown brick road. It's the road to perdition.
Yeah. Okay, but what I'm saying is that is that in the absence of production, all of these other rights are meaningless. But I believe that our society is gotten to the point where it has so much. It got to the point where it had so much wealth, it could borrow against its wealth to provide the rights. And politicians who want to be elected and have power glommed onto that idea and say, yes, elect me,
I will
provide you with all of those things. And so I believe that radical individualism, as you and I are describing it, and radical meaning the sense that individuals think they have a right to all kinds of things, even if they don't produce enough to provide themselves with all those things. I believe that the root cause of that is because the federal government can coin money and borrow money, and no other entity in our country has the right to coin money.
Yeah.
Others have the right to borrow, but they can't coin. And so there's a limit to how much they can borrow, except for the federal government.
Yes.
And there'll be a point. The Wall Street Journal had an interesting article saying that there's a point, and the writer didn't know what that point was, but said there's a point at which the dollar will no longer be the reserve currency. And when we reach that point, then our ability to borrow will evaporate almost overnight.
So just for those of our listeners who don't know what a reserve currency is, let's cover that. Right now, it's used to trade all around the world.
All over the world. Yeah.
So it's basically the reference point for economic value.
Right, and it's the only currency in the world that is universally seen as a universal currency.
So others people trade in yuan or pounds. I guess it's the euro. There is trade that's conducted in those currencies
within their own communities.
Yeah.
And but the dollar is the currency of choice at this point.
Yes.
Now, if it gets to where the value of the dollar is questionable, the value of a dollar is questionable.
Right.
Then it will cease to be a reserve currency. And that's why you see all these cryptocurrencies. And that's why you see the price of gold going up so rapidly, is you see these alternatives to, Florida just passed a law that says that you can transact, you can do economic transactions in the state of Florida in gold and silver. You don't have to do it in just dollars.
Let's step back a second. Coinage used to be made of precious metal.
Mm-hmm.
You got a piece of silver that had a certain amount of price. You got a piece of gold that had a certain amount of price. The reason there are ridges on the edges of a coin was to be able to detect filings, because people would shave off just a little bit, then collect the dust and melt it down.
Yeah.
So they would cheat everybody they gave a coin to by, a few cents worth out of that coin.
Yeah.
And
quarters, the 25-cent quarters used to be silver. Now they have a layer of copper.
And I understand the Treasury has stopped making pennies now because it costs them more to make a penny than the penny is worth.
Correct.
Right, so coinage, they started with barter. We did our little exercise on the island and how economies start at the very start of this podcast. But barter turned into coinage. Coinage has made way for basically cyber accounting. Most of the wealth we have is a number in a computer somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. It's not backed up by metal that we can go get.
Right.
The whole idea of Fort Knox was that was the wealth of the country. There was gold there that backed the value that was out there circulating. We've gone off the gold standard. So the advantage of these cryptocurrencies, these virtual kinds of ways of transacting money, is it's very flexible and it's not subject to abuse by the government. It doesn't lose value because of what the government does to inflate.
Correct. The cryptos. Cryptos or gold or silver.
Yeah, and the people I know that really like that's one of the things they're attracted to, is they're not subject to the abuses of government.
Right.
That we've been talking about.
Right. And so what we're talking about here is this trend in individual rights where I get what I want. Those types of things.
Yes.
That radical individualism.
Yes.
I get what I want even if I don't have the means to pay for it.
Yes.
And what I'm suggesting is, as we're talking through this, what I'm suggesting is it's the ability of the federal government to borrow, and it is borrowing in immense amounts of money now.
Yeah, it indulges that wish.
Yes.
Far beyond where it should be indulged.
It allows politicians to win votes.
Yeah.
By telling people who have those demands, yes, vote for me, and I'll give them to you. And because the money is being borrowed, that politician doesn't have to say, at the same time that they say, I'm going to grant you your wish, and tax these people. Now they don't have to say, I'm going to tax these people. It's just we're going to borrow. And, of course, the borrowing diminishes the standard of living across the board.
So maybe we've done a decent job of diagnosing what the problem is, right? We're doctors here, okay? Mm-hmm. We've diagnosed, I think, semi-accurately, there may be some pieces we've missed, what the disease is.
Yep.
You know, the question is, what's the therapy? What is the cure? And I don't think any of us have it within our power to cure this, right? We're not government officials.
That's what we're seeing right now, quite frankly, is this battle between this and because you now can't, you now find, and I hate having to be partisan about this in the sense of identifying one party, but this issue over Obamacare, this was a temporary. The Obamacare increases in what your standard, what your income could be to get Obamacare, that increased as an emergency measure under COVID.
Yes,
and COVID's gone now, but yet it's the Democrat Party is determined
won't let it go back.
That won't let it go back, and that is driving up the debt in this country at an extraordinary pace, and it is unsustainable.
Right.
And so you have other countries that like Argentina, where the government acted in the same way, but inflation got to 150 to 200% before that the government that perpetuated those policies collapsed.
Right.
And now the person who is trying to fix it is starting in a giant hole.
Well, you have the same thing in Argentina, where they're trying to undo decades of bad policy that have inflated away the wealth that the country had.
Right. And so here, what you have is and it's going to be very interesting, and we'll be discussing it, what's going to happen with this, because this Obamacare issue, as of December 31st, the new subsidies for that another ratchet, they go away. And so insurance rates for those people will go up dramatically. Mm-hmm. Because it was temporary, and the temporary period is now over. Republicans are working furiously to try to come up with an alternative. I've seen a bunch of ideas, but I haven't seen anything that I think addresses the fundamental problem, and that is the very high cost, not really cost.
Price?
The price that insurance reimburses. We have a system that 60%. We've talked about this before. 60% of the $5 trillion is spent on adjudication, and only 40% is spent on providing the actual service. I've not seen Republicans, and the reason that is possible is there is no price transparency.
Right.
When you need surgery and you have insurance, or you need to go to the doctor and you have insurance, the price that the doctor charges is opaque and is paid through a negotiation with the insurance company, which then charges individuals or companies huge premiums to then reimburse doctors at an inflated amount, not because the doctors are getting rich, but because the doctors have to spend so much money to collect the money for their service. And so you have this extraordinarily expensive, archaic system that if it is extended, will just get worse.
You know, I had surgery this past summer. It was, robotic abdominal surgery. It was pretty major surgery.
Mm-hmm. Were you in bed were you in the hospital?
Yes, yeah.
For how long?
A couple days.
Couple days.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have no idea what it costs. I didn't pay a penny. I never saw a number.
Did you get an EOB? Explanation of benefits? I
haven't seen it. My wife may have seen it. But, we paid the one-time price, and it didn't paid monthly, and then that's it. There was no copay. Now, I had to have the surgery. I would have paid whatever it took. I would have drained all of my accounts to have this because it was life-saving.
Well, but what's interesting
But I didn't have to do any of that.
Right. And that doesn't mean that in order for you to have it, that insurance was necessarily necessary. If you could have, if it had cost $10,000, would it have destroyed your life?
Well, no,
because you're paying more than that in premiums.
Yeah.
So So what I'm saying is that our system, the healthcare system itself, and I don't want to just become a healthcare podcast
discussion, yeah.
But I do want it to be that all this individualism, everybody says they have a right to whatever it is they want, and there is more and more of that. You see Mamdani winning, and they were free bus rides. I want lower rent. I want this. I want that. I want groceries at a cheaper price, even though the margin in grocery stores is 2 to 3%. If grocery prices are 10% lower, then the food markets will go out of business very quickly.
Yeah.
And so you see all of these things that people are saying they want, and they want somebody else to pay for it. And the reason that is even possible is the debt side that the federal government is going into. And the problem, Mike, is that's accelerating.
Yeah.
If you just go back and look, and you see now where $2 trillion annual deficits are now the norm. When Trump was president the first time, the federal deficit was $900 billion a year until the COVID year. But
I remember when it was $200 or $300 billion, and we thought that was crazy. It's just unsustainable.
Exactly.
Now it's 10 times as big.
Yes, and we're not at war.
Yeah.
We're not even funding Ukraine. We're not even funding that. And we're still running these big deficits, and we're also still loaning money for student loans that aren't being repaid, and that money has to be borrowed to be doing it. And so we're at a point where over the last 20 years, this trend that you're talking about, where people believe they have a right to a college education and pay for nothing. They have a right to food. They have a right to housing. They have a right to health care. If all those things combined cost, I'm just picking a number, $60,000 a person, and the average person is making $45,000, then we're borrowing the other 25%. We're borrowing the other 15 times all the people in the country.
There's another book worth mentioning here, and that's Friedrich Hayek's Road to Serfdom.
Yep.
And he wrote this in the late, I think, the 40s or something.
Yep, exactly.
And he basically was saying that these ideas are the road to penury, if you use another obsolete, a kind of strange word, but it's the road to poverty.
Well, he predicted what is happening right now.
Yes.
So for those of our listeners who really want to understand this, the Road to Serfdom is, and by the way, it's not a big thick book.
That's right.
It's probably 150 pages.
Right.
And it's very concise. And he won Hayek won a Nobel Prize.
Yes.
For that work.
And I think generally that was conceptually the prize was awarded for the role of markets in identifying value. That the price system is a information system that tells us how to act.
Yes.
Right. And when we don't allow the market to work, as we do not now with government taking on more and more of these things, we don't know what things cost. So we don't have the information to know how to allocate capital, et cetera.
Right.
We're very half blind.
Because it's demanded, and politicians then pass a bill to provide it.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not it's cost effective.
Yes.
So, well, Michael, I don't know that we've solved a lot of problems, but this radical individualism is there two ways of looking at it. One is leave me alone, and the other is give me what I want.
And this is part of the confusion I think we have in our cultures. There's two ways of looking at almost all of these things. There's two ways of looking at what is truth. You know, is the truth with a capital T or a small t? Whose truth is it? There are plenty of objective truths, okay?
Sure.
But we live in a world that is increasingly subjective, and the version you don't like you call fake, right? And so it makes almost everything partisan.
Yeah.
And,
yes.
You know, how do we work our way out of a situation where everything is just
the partisanship becomes more extreme.
Right. And we bounce between guardrails as we go from one regime to the other.
Right.
Between elections.
And the regimes are, as you point out, when one party is in power, it does this. When the other party is in power, it does this.
The opposite.
It does the opposite.
Yeah.
And that's
very literally, I think both Biden and Trump, when they got in office, their first day was signing executive orders that canceled what the other guy did.
Yes. Yeah, good point. Good point. And that's unsustainable.
Yeah.
That is unsustainable. Well, Michael, we're gonna call it a day on December 5th, and I will see you next Friday.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.